Before 1903, every single Coca-Cola bottle was blown by hand in a glass factory. Workers, including children as young as 8, stood at the glory holes of balling furnaces burning at 2,400 degrees Fahrenheit, gathered molten glass on iron blowpipes, and shaped every bottle individually. The carrying-in boys ran finished bottles barefoot across floors covered in broken glass. Glass blowers went blind from infrared radiation. The heat at the furnace mouth exceeded 130 degrees Fahrenheit. Children worked 12-hour shifts in these conditions. Then, in 1903, Michael Owens invented the Owens automatic bottle machine, a massive rotating device that could produce 240 bottles per minute without a single human touching the glass. Hell's Carousel, the machine that freed the children, 4 tons of coal every hour, shoveled into the furnace mouth by men whose faces were permanently scorched red from the heat. That's what it took to keep the balling furnace burning at 2,400 degrees Fahrenheit. Hot enough to turn sand and limestone into liquid glass. Hot enough to cook the moisture out of your eyes. Hot enough to blind you permanently if you stared at it long enough, and many did. The infrared radiation didn't announce itself, didn't warn you, just cooked your retinas day after day until cataracts clouded your vision and the world went dark. And standing at that furnace mouth, where the ambient temperature hit 130 degrees, even 6 feet back, were children, 8 years old, some younger, barefoot because shoes cost money their families didn't have, carrying finished bottles, still warm, sometimes still hot enough to burn, across factory floors covered in broken glass, sharp fragments everywhere. You couldn't avoid them. You just learned to walk carefully and hoped you didn't slip. 12-hour shifts, sometimes longer when orders were backed up. No breaks, except when the foreman wasn't watching. No schooling. Many couldn't read their own names, couldn't write a single word, didn't matter. Literacy wasn't a job requirement. The bottles had to be made, and someone had to make them, and children's labor was cheap. This was America in 1900, not in some dark, distant past, in living memory, your great-grandparents' time. 1.7 million children under the age of 15 working in factories, mines, and fields. Working because their families would starve without their wages. Working because no law stopped it. Working because that's how bottles got made, every bottle. Medicine bottles, milk bottles, beer bottles, Coca-Cola bottles. Every single one required human hands, human breath, human lungs, and very often those hands and lungs belonged to children. Then, in 1903, a glassblower from West Virginia built a machine that changed everything. Michael Owens, a man who'd started working in a glass factory at age 10, who knew exactly what the furnace room cost because he'd paid the price himself. The Owens automatic bottle machine. 6 rotating arms mounted on a carousel. No human hands touching the molten glass. No human breath blowing the bottles. Just vacuum pumps, compressed air, and precision mechanics doing what an entire team of workers had done before. 240 bottles per minute, 4 bottles every second. Faster than any human team could dream of working, and it ended child labor in the glass industry faster than any law, any regulation, any reformer ever could. The National Child Labor Committee, the people who'd spent a decade trying to pass federal legislation, trying to shame factory owners, trying to force change through the courts, said it themselves in 1913. They made a public statement. The Owens automatic bottle machine had done more to eliminate child labor than they had been able to accomplish through legislation. A machine, a rotating carousel of iron and vacuum and steam. It succeeded where Congress had failed, where the Supreme Court had blocked them, where state legislatures had looked the other way. It was called the most significant advance in glass production in 2,000 years. It made Coca-Cola possible, made the modern pharmaceutical industry possible, made food preservation at industrial scale possible. It saved thousands of children from the furnace, and it almost didn't work. The problem Michael Owens had to solve, how to gather molten glass mechanically when every inventor before him had failed, was considered unsolvable. The materials available couldn't handle it. The physics didn't seem to allow it. The engineering was beyond what anyone knew how to build. But we're getting ahead of ourselves, because before we understand what the machine did, before we see how Owens solved the impossible, you need to understand what came before. You need to see the furnace room, need to feel the heat, need to watch an 8-year-old boy carry a bottle across broken glass, and understand that this happened millions of times, every day, for decades, because that's what made the machine necessary. That's what made Michael Owens spend 5 years and $500,000 of someone else's money chasing a solution no one thought would work. This is the story of the machine that freed the children, and the story of the man who built it, even though he never believed child labor was wrong. When glass was blown by breath, before we understand what the machine did, you need to see what it replaced, not read about it. See it. Picture a glass factory in 1900, not a factory in the modern sense, a furnace room, a cathedral of heat and fire and danger where the primary architectural feature was the balling furnace, a massive brick structure burning at 2,400 degrees Fahrenheit at its core. The iron blowpipes were 5 feet long, heavy, hot at one end from proximity to the furnace, and at the other end, where it cooled enough to touch, was where you put your mouth, your lips, your human lips against iron that had been in and out of a 2,400-degree furnace all day. That's how you made a bottle in 1900. You gathered molten glass on the end of the pipe, scooped it from the furnace like honey except it was liquid stone, and you brought it to your station. You positioned it in the iron mold, and you blew. Put your lips to the pipe, filled your lungs, and blew air through the pipe into the molten glass blob. Your breath shaped the glass, your pressure controlled the walls, your lungs gave it form. One bottle. If you were skilled, truly skilled, a master glassblower with years of experience, maybe 2 bottles an hour. That was fast. That was good. Most men couldn't maintain that pace, but you weren't alone. You couldn't be. Glassblowing wasn't a solo operation. It was a team, a carefully orchestrated dance around the furnace where every person had a role, and if one person failed, the whole operation stopped. First, the gatherer. His job was to dip the blowpipe into the furnace and gather the molten glass. Had to be the right amount. Too little, and the bottle would be thin, weak, prone to shattering. Too much, and it wouldn't fit the mold, would be too heavy, would waste expensive material. The gatherer judged by sight, by feel, by years of experience that taught him exactly what a proper gather looked like on the end of a 5-foot iron pipe. No scales, no measurements, just skill. Then the mold boy, usually, actually, a boy. 10, 12, 14 years old. He operated the iron mold. Opened it, closed it, opened it again at precisely the right moment. Timing was everything. Close it too early, and you trap air bubbles. Too late, and the glass starts to cool and won't form properly. The mold boy sat at the blower's feet, right there in the heat, right there in the danger zone. If the blower moved wrong, if the pipe slipped, if the glass dripped, the mold boy caught it, sometimes literally. Then the blower himself, the skilled craftsman, the man whose breath created bottles. He had to blow with exactly the right pressure. Too soft, and the glass wouldn't fill the mold. Too hard, and it would be too thin, might even burst. He had to time it perfectly with the mold boy's movements, had to account for the temperature of the glass, which changed minute by minute as it cooled. Had to work fast because glass waits for no one. Once it starts cooling, you have seconds to shape it before it hardens wrong. Then the snap boy, another kid. His job was to crack the finished bottle free from the blowpipe using a tool called a snap. One sharp tap in exactly the right spot, and the glass separated clean. Miss the spot, and you shatter the whole bottle. Hours of work destroyed in a second. Then the finisher. He smoothed the rough edges where the bottle had been snapped free, reheated the mouth of the bottle in what they called a glory hole, a smaller, focused furnace opening, and shaped the rim so it was smooth even, ready to accept a cork or cap. And finally, the carrying-in boy. The youngest, the cheapest, the most expendable. His job was simple. Take the finished bottle from the finisher and carry it to the lair. The lair was the annealing oven where bottles were slowly heated and cooled to temper the glass, to relieve internal stresses, to make them strong enough to survive being filled and shipped and used. The carrying-in boy made this trip over and over, dozens of times an hour, hundreds of times a shift, walking across factory floors that were covered, not spotted, not occasionally littered, but covered in broken glass, shards from dropped bottles, fragments from cracked molds, slivers that had chipped off during finishing, everywhere. And he did it barefoot, because shoes cost money, because his family was poor, because that's what poor children did in 1900. They worked barefoot in glass factories. An investigator from the National Child Labor Committee timed one of these boys, followed him for an hour, measured his route, did the math. At his pace, walking back and forth from the finishing station to the lair all night long, that boy walked more than 20 miles per shift. 20 miles, barefoot, on broken glass, at 12 years old, alternating day shifts and night shifts every week because glass furnaces ran 24 hours. You couldn't shut them down, couldn't let them cool. The restart cost was too high, so someone had to work nights, and children worked cheaper than adults. The factories preferred boys under 16, paid them half of what they'd pay a man, worked them just as hard. That was the system. 6, 7, sometimes 8 people working in perfect coordination to produce one bottle every half hour. Maybe faster if the team was excellent. Maybe slower if they were tired, which they always were by hour 8, hour 10, hour 12 of the shift. That's how every bottle got made. Every wine bottle, every medicine bottle, every milk bottle, every Coca-Cola bottle. Every single one required a team of men and boys standing in 100 to 130-degree heat, breathing furnace fumes that would scar your lungs, handling glass that could burn through skin in seconds. And they did it because there was no other way. Bottles were essential. You couldn't preserve food without them, couldn't store medicine safely, couldn't ship beverages. The Industrial Revolution was creating products that needed containers, and glass was the only option. Cheap, inert, sealable, reusable. Every factory needed bottles. Every household needed bottles. Every pharmacy, every grocery, every bar. The demand was endless, so children worked, fathers worked, and men went blind. Glassblower's cataract, that's what doctors called it. An occupational disease documented in medical journals since 1739. More than 160 years of knowing it was happening, and no one could stop it. The infrared radiation from the furnace, invisible, undetectable, relentless, slowly cooked the proteins in your eye lens, caused them to denature, to clump, to turn opaque. First, your vision blurred. You thought maybe you needed spectacles. Then colors started fading. The world lost its vividness, turned gray and washed out. Then you couldn't see at night. Then you couldn't see in dim light. Then you couldn't see at all. The lens of your eye had literally cooked solid. clouded like a poached egg white. And there was nothing you could do about it except quit glass blowing, which meant losing your livelihood, which meant your family starved. So you kept working, kept standing at the furnace, kept squinting at the molten glass, and went blind. Same with the inflammation in your throat and lungs from breathing furnace gases 12 hours a day. The heat dried out your respiratory system. The fumes, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, whatever was burning in the coal, scarred your bronchial tubes. Glassblowers had a characteristic raspy cough. Everyone recognized it, the sound of damaged lungs trying to expel irritants that had been baked in. Same with the burns. They were constant. Drops of molten glass falling on your arms, accidental contact with the pipe, splashes when you gathered too aggressively, the furnace itself radiating heat that would scorch exposed skin. Most glassblowers had scars up and down their forearms, badge of the trade, evidence that you'd been doing this long enough to accumulate injuries. Same with the cuts from broken glass, same with the heat exhaustion when summer temperatures outside hit 90 and the factory floor was already at 130, and you still had 6 hours left in your shift. Same with watching your own children, 8, 9, 10 years old, standing in the same factory, learning the same trade, on track to develop the same cataract, the same lung damage, the same scars. One father put it simply, bluntly. He told a labor investigator from the U.S. Bureau of Labor, "I would rather send my boys straight to hell than send them by way of the glass house." Let that sit. He was comparing the glass factory to eternal damnation, and he meant it, because he knew what it cost. He was living the cost, and he was watching his sons start paying it too. But the bottles still had to be made. By 1900, America had 1.7 million children under the age of 15 working in factories, mines, and fields. In the South, a quarter of cotton mill workers were under 15. Half of those were under 12. Glass factories employed thousands of children, and every attempt to stop it through legislation failed. State laws were weak when they existed at all. Massachusetts had banned children under 10 from factory work in 1842. Other states followed slowly, very slowly. By 1900, only 28 states had any child labor laws, and most of those laws had loopholes big enough to drive a wagon through. Unless the family needs the income, unless the child consents, unless the parent approves, which meant effectively no restrictions at all, because poor families always needed the income, and parents always approved because the alternative was starvation. Federal laws were struck down by the Supreme Court. Every time Congress tried to regulate child labor, the court said it exceeded federal authority, violated states' rights, interfered with freedom of contract. The Keating-Owen Act passed in 1916, banned interstate shipment of goods made with child labor. The Supreme Court declared it unconstitutional in 1918. Congress tried again. The court struck it down again. This pattern would repeat for decades. The law couldn't touch it. The National Child Labor Committee formed in 1904 specifically to fight this. They hired investigators to document conditions. They hired photographers, including Lewis Hine, whose images would later become iconic, to capture children at work. They organized exhibitions showing the photographs to the public. They published reports. They lobbied Congress. They pressured state legislatures. They did everything they could think of to force change. It didn't matter. Not enough. Not fast enough. The bottles still had to be made. The factories still needed workers. And children's labor was still cheap. And that's where Michael Owens comes in, because he knew exactly what it cost. He wasn't reading reports, wasn't looking at photographs. He'd paid it himself, in his own body, in his own eyes, in his own childhood that had been spent in the furnace room. He knew. The Boy Who Learned in Fire. January 1st, 1859. Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Michael Joseph Owens was born to Irish immigrants so poor that by the time he was 10 years old, he was working in a glass factory in Wheeling. His father was a coal miner. His mother had nothing. There was no choice. The boy went to work, 10 years old, standing at the furnace, learning to gather, learning to blow, learning that glass didn't care how old you were or how much it hurt. It demanded skill, precision, endurance, and by the time Owens was 15, he had it. He was a glass blower, a good one. He worked his way up, Wheeling, then Martins Ferry, Ohio, then, in 1888, Toledo. That's where Edward Drummond Libby found him. Libby was everything Owens wasn't. Wealthy, well-born, educated. He owned the Toledo glass factory, and he saw something in Owens. Within 3 months, Owens was managing the glassworks department. Within a few years, he was running operations, and that's when Owens made his pitch. He told Libby he had an idea for a machine, an automatic bottle machine, something that could make bottles without blowers, without gatherers, without mold boys or snap boys or carrying-in boys, just a machine. Libby could have laughed, could have told him to get back to work. Most industrialists would have, but Libby was different. He'd already made a fortune. He believed in innovation. He believed in Owens, so he gave him the money, gave him the time, gave him the engineers, and told him to build it. 5 years. That's how long it took. $500,000. That's what it cost. A colossal sum in the early 1900s, equivalent to tens of millions today. And the whole time, children kept working, kept walking barefoot across broken glass, kept standing at furnaces hot enough to cook their lungs, because Owens hadn't solved the problem yet. The problem every other inventor had failed to solve. How do you gather molten glass without human hands? That was the question. The blowing part, engineers could mechanize. The molding part, they'd figured out. But gathering, pulling that precise amount of molten glass from the furnace pool, that required a human gatherer with years of experience who could judge by sight and feel exactly how much glass to take. No machine could do that, not in 1900, not with the technology available, not with the materials they had. Owens wasn't an engineer. He had no formal training. He couldn't do the math, couldn't draw the blueprints. What he could do was explain what he saw in his head to draftsmen who would try to make it real. And what he saw was a vacuum, a plunger. Pull it back, and it creates suction. Suction pulls the glass up into the mold. Push the plunger forward, and it sends a burst of compressed air into the glass. The air blows it into shape. Simple. Except it had never been done. Except no one knew if the materials could handle the heat. Except no one knew if the timing could be synchronized. Except no one knew if it would work at all. The patent was granted 1904. The first bottle rolled off the machine, and it worked. Arms that never tire. Picture a carousel, not the kind children ride at a fair, an industrial carousel. 6 arms, later models had 10, rotating around a central hub powered by steam and gears. Each arm holds a mold. Each mold connects to a pipe that looks like a blowpipe but isn't. There's no human mouth at the end, just a piston, a mechanical pump. Precision engineering where human breath used to be. Watch it work. The arm rotates into position, lowers, positions the mold directly over the pool of molten glass sitting in the furnace pot. The piston pulls back, creates a vacuum inside the pipe. The vacuum sucks a measured gob of glass up into the mold through a small opening in the bottom. Exact same amount every time. No human judgment required. No eyeballing it. The physics does the measuring. The vacuum pulls until the mold is full, then stops. Perfect consistency. Every single bottle. The arm rotates to the next position, 90 degrees around the carousel. The piston reverses. sends a burst of compressed air down through the pipe into the molten glass trapped in the mold. The air pressure blows the glass outward against the walls of the mold, forming it into the precise shape: bottleneck, shoulder, body, base. The physics of pressure distribution ensure uniform wall thickness, no variation, no human error, no bottles that are thicker on one side than the other because the blower was tired. The arm keeps rotating. The glass cools just enough to hold its shape, but not enough to fully harden. Timing is critical here. Too fast and the glass is still too soft will deform when it's released. Too slow and it hardens in the mold, won't release clean, creates defects. The machine times it perfectly. The same every cycle, the same every hour, the same every day. The arm reaches the next position. A mechanical knife, sharp, precise, spring-loaded, cuts the glass free from the source. One clean slice. The finished bottle separates, drops onto a conveyor belt running alongside the carousel. The belt is timed to the machine's rotation, always there, always ready, always moving. The belt carries the bottle to the annealing layer, a long, tunnel-like oven where the bottles are gradually reheated and slowly cooled to relieve internal stresses in the glass. This tempering process makes them strong, stable, ready for filling, capping, shipping. The belt feeds them in one end. They emerge from the other end hours later, cool to the touch, ready for packing. Meanwhile, the arm that just released its bottle has rotated back to the start, back over the molten glass pool. The piston pulls back, creates vacuum, sucks up the next measured gob. The cycle begins again, and again, and again. 6 arms, 6 cycles running simultaneously at different phases. As one arm is gathering glass, another is blowing, another is cooling, another is cutting free, another is returning to start. Continuous production. No pauses, no breaks, no fatigue. 6 bottles per minute on the first version. Owens and his team tested it, refined it, made adjustments. 12 bottles per minute, then more. The AR model, perfected in 1912 after 9 years of continuous improvement, could produce 50,400 bottles in a day. Run the math. That's 4 bottles every second at peak speed. 240 bottles per minute when everything was running at full capacity. No gatherer, no blower, no mold boys opening and closing molds by hand, no snap boys cracking bottles free, no carrying in boys walking barefoot across broken glass. Just the machine, rotating, gathering, blowing, cutting, delivering, over and over and over without stopping, without tiring, without going blind, without burning its arms, without developing cataracts, without destroying its lungs. The industry magazine called it a revolution. They weren't exaggerating. The Owens machine stands alone in a class unapproached by other inventors, they wrote. It eliminates all skill and labor and reduces the cost of production practically to the cost of materials used. Not only that, but it puts the same amount of glass into every bottle, makes every bottle of the same exact length, finish, weight, shape, and capacity. It wastes no glass, uses no pipes, snaps, finishing tools, glory holes, gatherer, blower, mold boy, snap boy, or finisher, and still makes better bottles, more of them, at a lower cost than is possible by any other known process. Read that again. Better bottles, more of them, at a lower cost than is possible by any other known process. That's not marketing language. That's the death sentence for an entire craft, for an entire workforce, for an entire way of doing things that had existed for centuries. Translation: it made everything they'd been doing obsolete, including the people who'd been doing it. The glassblowers knew it immediately. Their unions fought to keep the machines out of factories, organized resistance, threatened strikes, demanded contracts that prohibited automation. A few machines were even sabotaged. Mysterious mechanical failures that weren't so mysterious when you found metal filings in the gears or sand in the vacuum pumps. Workers who'd spent 20 years learning the craft, learning to judge gather size by sight, learning to control air pressure with their lungs, learning the 10,000 subtle skills that separated a master glassblower from an apprentice, watched their expertise become worthless overnight. By 1917, just 14 years after the first Owens machine started production, the number of skilled glassblowers in America had been cut in half. Half! Gone! Unemployed, or retrained into other work. And here's what's brutal about progress. It doesn't care about your skill. It doesn't care that you spent your childhood learning to blow glass. It doesn't care that you can judge temperature by color, that you know exactly how long to hold a gather before it starts to cool too much, that you've blown 100,000 bottles and everyone was perfect. It cares about what's more efficient, what's cheaper, what's more consistent. And the machine was all three. 80% cheaper to operate, 80% faster than the best human team, perfect consistency, zero variation in bottle weight, shape, or capacity, no human error, no off days, no exhaustion setting in during hour 11 of a 12-hour shift, no blindness reducing productivity. The economics were undeniable, overwhelming, inevitable. But that wasn't the impossible part. The impossible part was making it work when no one knew if the physics would hold, when no one knew if a vacuum pump could handle 2,400-degree glass, when no one knew if the timing could be precise enough, when no one knew if the molds could withstand the thermal stress of rapid heating and cooling thousands of times a day, when the man designing it couldn't do the engineering math himself and had to explain his ideas to draftsmen who would translate his vision into something that might actually function. That was the challenge. That was what ate 5 years and $500,000. That was what could have failed at any moment and bankrupted Libby and left the children in the furnace room. It didn't fail, but the children were still there, because building the first machine was one thing. Getting it into every factory was another. The carousel goes to war. The first commercial model, the A, started production. Libby and Owens formed the Owens Bottle Machine Company. They didn't manufacture bottles, not at first. They manufactured the machines, and they leased them. Factories could license the technology, pay royalties, install the machines, fire the children. That was the business model, and it spread fast. By 1911, 103 Owens machines were operating in the United States. 9 European countries had them. Japan had them. Hundreds of millions of bottles were being produced annually. The Ball brothers, the jar company, bought the exclusive rights to make fruit jars on Owens machines in 1909. They knew what was coming. They knew that any factory without these machines would become obsolete, outdated, uncompetitive. So they bought the rights, locked down the technology, and watched their business explode. But it wasn't just the factories that changed. It was everything downstream. The cost of glass bottles dropped 80%. Suddenly, food companies could afford to can products they'd never been able to preserve before. Pharmaceutical companies could store medicine safely in sterile glass containers. Beverage companies, including a small operation in Atlanta called Coca-Cola, could bottle drinks cheaply enough to sell them nationwide. The machine didn't just automate bottle making. It made modern consumer culture possible, and it eliminated child labor, not through legislation, not through reform, through obsolescence. When the machine could do the work of 6 men and 10 boys, there was no economic reason to employ children anymore. They were redundant, unnecessary, free to go. Except most of them had nowhere to go. No education, no prospects, no skills except carrying bottles. The machine saved them from the furnace, but it didn't save them from poverty. That would take decades more. But at least they weren't going blind anymore, At least they weren't breathing poison for 12 hours a day. At least they could sleep at night instead of walking 20 miles in the dark. The National Child Labor Committee, the organization that had spent a decade trying to pass federal laws against child labor, made a public statement. They said the Owens automatic bottle machine had done more to eliminate child labor than they had been able to accomplish through legislation. Let that sit. A machine, a rotating carousel of iron arms and vacuum pumps and compressed air. It accomplished what Congress couldn't, what the Supreme Court wouldn't allow, what state legislatures had failed to enforce, because it made child labor economically unnecessary. You didn't need a law when there was no profit in it. You didn't need enforcement when the machine was cheaper. Progress didn't care about morality. It cared about efficiency. And efficiency saved the children. But saving them cost someone else. The men who lost their breath, the glassblowers, didn't go quietly. How could they? They'd spent their lives learning a craft that took years to master, gathering the glass, judging the temperature, controlling the blow, shaping the form. It was skill, real skill, the kind you couldn't teach in a week, the kind that separated a master from an apprentice, and overnight it was worthless. By 1917, half of them were gone, out of work, unemployed, too specialized for other trades, too old to retrain. Some factories tried to keep using hand-blowing, tried to compete with the machines. They couldn't. The economics didn't work. When Owens machines could produce 50,400 bottles a day at 80% lower cost with perfect consistency, there was no competitive advantage to hand-blowing, none. The market didn't care about tradition, it cared about price, and the machines won. A few of them fought back, sabotaged machines, tried to slow adoption. It didn't matter. The technology was too good, the cost savings too large, the quality too consistent. One by one, factories converted. One by one, the glassblowers found other work or found nothing. And here's the irony that cuts deeper than any broken glass. The machine was invented by one of them, Michael Owens, a glassblower, a man who'd spent his childhood in the furnace room, who'd learned the craft, who knew the cost, and who built the machine that made all of it obsolete, including himself. Did he care about the displaced workers, about the men who lost their livelihoods? Apparently not. In a 1922 interview, Owens defended child labor, said it built character, said modern life was too soft. One of the greatest evils of modern life is the growing habit of regarding work as an affliction, he told the magazine. When I was a youngster, I wanted to work. A great deal of the trouble today is with the mothers. Too many boys are being brought up by sentimental women. This from the man whose machine ended child labor in the glass industry. This from the man who freed thousands of children from the furnace. He didn't see it as saving them. He saw it as making them soft. He'd survived the furnace room. Why shouldn't they? That was his logic, cold, brutal, and completely irrelevant. Because the machine existed, the children were free, and no amount of nostalgia for hardship could change that. The glassblowers understood something Owens didn't want to admit. The machine wasn't just more efficient. It was better. Not morally better. Mechanically better. It didn't get tired, didn't get sick, didn't go blind, didn't make mistakes. Every bottle identical. Every cycle precise. No variation. No human error. The craft was beautiful. The craft was skillful. The craft was inferior. And the market chose. But the market also adapted, because while the skilled glassblowers lost their jobs, something else happened. The industry grew, massively. Bottles became so cheap that demand exploded. Food companies, beverage companies, pharmaceutical companies, cosmetics, household products. Everyone needed bottles, and making bottles required workers, not glassblowers, machine operators, maintenance workers, packers, sorters, And for the first time in the glass industry, women. Women were hired to sort and pack the endless stream of bottles flowing off the Owens machines. Jobs that didn't require years of apprenticeship, jobs that didn't require standing at 130-degree furnace mouths, jobs that didn't cause blindness. By the 1920s, the glass industry employed more people than it had before automation. Different people, different jobs, but more of them. The glass blowers were gone, the children were gone, and the bottles kept coming, faster than ever. Where Titans Rest, December 17, 1982, Gas City, Indiana. The last two Owens automatic bottle machines, the AQ model, shut down for the final time. 79 years, that's how long they ran. From 1903 to 1982, 3/4 of a century of rotating arms and vacuum pumps and compressed air, blowing millions upon millions of bottles. Then they stopped, not because they failed, because something better came along. More modern automation, computer-controlled systems, press and blow technology. The same thing that had killed the glass blowers eventually killed the Owens machines. Progress. But the legacy didn't stop. 1983. The American Society of Mechanical Engineers designated the Owens AR bottle machine an International Historic Engineering Landmark, called it the most significant advance in glass production in over 2,000 years. 2,000 years! Since the Romans perfected glass blowing, nothing had changed the industry like Owens's machine. Nothing. Today, the archives sit at the University of Toledo. Owens' original drawings, the company records, photographs of the machines, letters, patents, the physical evidence of what happened when one man with no engineering degree solved a problem that had defeated everyone else. The companies that descended from that 1903 invention are still operating. Owens, Illinois, still making glass containers. Owens Corning, fiberglass. Libby Owens Ford, automotive glass. 3 corporate giants, all tracing back to the rotating carousel that freed the children. Michael Owens died in 1923. He was 64, never got to retire, spent his whole life working, from age 10 until his death. Glass factories, inventions, patents, 49 patents total. He made fortunes for other people, made a fortune for himself, and defended child labor in magazine interviews even as his machine eliminated it. A man of contradictions, a man of his time, a man who built something that outlived his opinions by decades. But here's what matters. Here's what the machine actually accomplished. It ended child labor in the glass industry, not gradually, not through compromise, immediately. The moment a factory installed an Owens machine, the carrying-in boys were done. The mold boys were done. The children went home. Some went to school for the first time. Some found other work. Some stayed poor. But none of them went blind from infrared radiation. None of them breathed furnace fumes for 12 hours. None of them walked barefoot across broken glass. The machine didn't give them better lives. It gave them the chance at better lives. And that's what technology does when it works. It doesn't solve everything. It solves one thing, one brutal, specific, impossible thing. And sometimes that's enough. The bottles still get made, billions of them, every year, in factories all over the world, on machines that are descendants of Owens's design, faster machines, smarter machines, better machines, but none of them more revolutionary. Because the revolution was the first one, the one that proved you could gather molten glass without human hands, the one that made blowing bottles with human breath obsolete, the one that ran for 79 years without stopping. They don't make them like that anymore. Not the machines, and not the children who used to make the bottles, because now they don't have to.